Здравствуйте. В
Hello.
этом году
This
кратно
year,
возросло количество
we've seen
хакерских атак
significant
практически на все
increase
отрасли
of hacker
экономики.
attacks against all the
Очень много
industries of
было
our
новостей,
economy. There was a lot
связанных
of
как со средствами
news
массовой
about
информации,
attacks
гражданскими
against mass
службами,
media,
промышленностью.
financial
Но
segment,
лишь
industrial segment,
доля
but
того,
this is a
небольшая доля того,
small
что на самом деле
share of
произошло.
what
Так
was
вот,
really
что
happening.
происходило с
So
хакерскими атаками
what
в этом
was happening
году
with hacker
и
attacks
что может
this
произойти в
year and
следующем
what
году?
could
Мы
happen
поговорим
next year?
с
We're going to
Денисом
speak about it
Кувшиновым,
with
руководителем
Denis
отдела
Kuvshinov, the head of the
киберугроз
Department of the
экспертного
Investigation of the
центра
Cyber Threats
безопасности
in the Expert
информатики
Center of
Московский
Security Policy
университет.
Technologies. Hello, Denis. Hi.
Расскажи, что происходило с
Can you
точки зрения
tell me,
хакерских
please,
атак в
what
этом
was
году? Какие
happening from the point of view of
изменения вы
hacker
видели по
attacks this year?
сравнению
What
с
changes did you see
предыдущим
compared
годом?
to the previous year?
22 год вообще, как
Year
всегда, был очень
2022,
тяжелым. То
as
есть
everybody knows, it was
многие
a
компании
complicated,
столкнулись
difficult year. Many
с
companies
таким
have
огромным количеством
faced
атак.
big
И
number
начиналось,
of
на самом деле,
attacks, and
все
everything have
с
started
активизма. То есть
with hacktivism.
большинство атак было
Most
это
of the
просто сбивать, да,
attacks,
то есть
it was
когда
the
активисты
just
чем-то
simple
недовольны,
DDoS attacks.
атаку,
When
там
hacktivists are not
DDoS,
happy, they do the attacks,
взлом
DDoS, deface, they break
сенситивные цели.
into the easier accessible targets,
Ну и
they
по факту
put the
это
data, and
заканчивается.
basically
Но
speaking, it comes
в
to an
нынешних
end
реалиях мы
someday. But
столкнулись
in current
именно
realities, we have
с
faced
организованным активизмом,
organized
который уже перерос в
hacktivism,
такую какую-то
which has
организационную
grown into the
структуру, да, то есть
organizational
такой киберармии.
structure, as they call it, a
Во-первых.
cyber army. That's
И
number
плюс со
one.
временем, в 2022 году мы
And
видим,
with time in the year
что
2022, we
DDoS
do
это
see that from
потихонечку
DDoS,
начало перерастать в
it
что-то
has
такое
moved
целевое.
into something more
Если вообще
targeted.
посмотреть на методы атак,
If you
которые
will look
были
at
в
methods of
ситуации идеальной,
attacks realized and what was really done,
техникам
well, in
взламывали
truth, they've
легкодоступные
been
цели, то есть,
breaking
например,
easily accessible targets. For
там, посвященных
example,
сферам
those
ИТ,
who are
МВО,
dedicated to the information security
сервисы,
sphere.
такие как
With the ease of different services, you'll be able to find which services are vulnerable in the internet. Because everybody been attacking RU segment, it reduces the amount of scopes
Да, благодаря вот
of
этим
goals.
сервисам
And thanks to
можно
these
было легко
services, one
найти,
could easily
там,
find,
например,
for
прокси-шеллы, да,
example,
которые
proxy
популярны
shells
сейчас для взлома
which are really popular for
и
being
расширения
broken
внутрь
in.
компании.
And through them, they've been breaking
И
in
взлом, на самом деле,
companies.
имеется,
And they've been
как
breaking
оказалось,
this,
не ради
as
монетизации,
it
которая
seems,
ради,
only for the
например, продаж,
monetization or maybe for
но на самом
sales.
деле они просто
But
взламывали
in real
компании,
situation, they just been
либо их
breaking
шифровали,
companies
либо
or been
выводили данные без
encrypting
доступа. То
them
есть
or
никакой
put them
монетизации не
into the
производилось.
open access. There was
Данные
no
выкладывались,
monetization.
все
The
могли
data
там
was leaked.
прочитать, там переписать
Everybody could read
документы,
this
получить
data,
какие-то
documents,
конфиденциальные
letters, get
данные,
some confidential
логины,
data,
пароли и так далее.
logins,
Но
passwords,
если
etc.
посмотреть на эти
But
утечки,
if you will look at
то
these
там
data leaks,
9 из 10 это
9
были на
out of
самом деле
10
утечки, собранные из
were data leaks collected
старых утечек,
from
либо
old
же
data leaks
просто
or
собранные данные из открытых источников.
data
На
collected
самом
from
деле
open
такие лики.
sources. So
Ну,
some kind of
получается,
fakes.
перевести это прямо
So 9 out
украинский,
of 10
нереальный
were
взлом, а
fakes,
скорее
non-real break-ins, but
попытка до
attempts
широкой аудитории донести
for
информацию
the
о том,
to
что якобы
deliver
взлом
information to the
состоялся.
wide
Вот
audience
смотрите,
that the
какие
break-in
данные
happened, and
мы
let's
располагаем,
please
но на
see
самом
which
деле это
data
все
is available.
публичная
But
информация.
honestly speaking, this was
Вот
public
вчера на Твиттере,
information.
как говорил
Yes, yesterday
мейнстейтмент, то
during
есть это
our
все делается ради хайпа. То есть
broadcast, it
просто
was
взлом
done
ради хайпа.
for the hype, the break-in for
Со
the sake
временем,
of the
да, мы
break-in.
видим, что
Yes,
атаки
with time, we
начали
do see that
усложняться, то
attacks
есть когда
became
уже
more and more
довольно высокая,
complicated,
низковисящие
and
фрукты были сорваны, то
when
есть нужно
low-hanging
было начать
fruits were
просто
already
взламывать. Потому что
collected,
на самом
the
деле,
attacks
если
had to
использовать
be
атаки с
complicated.
одними тем же
Because if you
инструментарием,
will
с одними
do
теми же
attacks with the
атаками,
same
то
tools,
есть
with
нам будет,
same
скажем, гораздо
tactics,
проще
every
identifицировать
time
именно
it will
атаки.
be much and much easier for us to detect them.
Атаки
So
усложнять, и, например, по
hackers
взлому
have
уже
to
защищены.
make attacks more
И
complicated.
получается,
Those who've
что
been broken, they're already
сейчас
protected.
то, что мы видим,
So
это
right now,
именно
things that we
усложнение
see
инструментария, то
is
есть атаки
complication of
происходят
the
все более и более
tool
сложными,
sets. Attacks
используются
become more
не
complicated, more
только там
difficult. They
через,
use not just break-in through,
например, через
for example,
внешний периметр, да, когда мы
through the
увидели
external
уязвимость и
perimeter when we found the vulnerability and
но в этом
exploited
году
it.
тренд
But also this
на
year there was a trend
внешние
for
зависимости. То есть
compromising
когда,
to
например,
external dependencies when, for
разработчик
example,
программирует
developer
код для какого-нибудь
programs a
какого-нибудь
code
продукта,
for
он
a
использует
certain
внешние
product and
зависимости,
they
там,
use
например,
external
Python с
dependencies,
IP.org.
for example, for the
И, как
Python
казалось
with
раньше,
IP.org.
что
And
open
as
source,
it
он
seemed
не
previously,
подключить,
open source is
нельзя
untouchable.
через open
It's
source
impossible
атаковать.
through open
Как
source
теоретически
to attack. This is not ethical.
в
So
этом
it's
году
independent for
несколько
everybody.
компаний
But
видели,
this year,
что
in the beginning of the year, we were able to see
тренд
that
такой, что
the
просто
trend
делаются
was
какие-нибудь там
to
лозунги, да,
just
политические,
do
используются
some
как уже
political
лозунговое действие.
statements and
Но со временем
no
это начало
malicious
более
actions.
сложно,
But
начал
with time,
становиться
it became more and more
финансирование.
complicated.
То есть
Malicious code has been
была
added.
компрометация даже
There
разработчиков,
was
хакеров.
compromission for the developers of these packages. they broken down the developer, and through popular packages it was delivered, and people could download whatever and this malicious code. And right now one can see that in order to decipher this code, you need to attract not only programmers, but you have to automate it, and you need to attract the virus analytics in order to decipher it. Another trend is for the complication of the discovery of the hackers, complication of discovering their activities. In other words, virtualization of the programs in order for the antivirus means of detection wouldn't be able to detect them. And this obfuscation of your network activity when it's getting trespassed, and hackers started using in the organization so-called popular external services to place their own control servers, like Telegram, Discord, and cloud services like Yandex, Dropbox, and OneDrive, etc. So these common control servers are used from Russian infrastructure. Yes. And they do it, well, the means of protection, they try to detect the signature method or compromising of the active hackers. If previously you could register the domain, and right now you can do it too, and put the malicious code inside of it, and this will become combined to the indication. But because people use cloud services and Telegram, this is not going to be noticeable, because you cannot block all the Telegram service and cloud service in the organization. And basically speaking, previously they've been using more complicated groups, OPTs, target attacks, but right now we do see that this is applied in regular break-ins of those activists. So this is a new trend that becomes stronger and stronger, and it's going to be happening in the future, and it's going to be much stronger. Out of the open source applications, which are the most known and which are the most popular ones used by the hackers? Well, speaking about the open source, it's more related to libraries of development. These were npm JavaScript packages in repository. They have downloaded, even developers have downloaded calls for action, and they've been downloading this action, and they've seen it in their applications, and we all have seen it. Also, this is related to the Python. There is IP.org repository, and right now we have a lot of malicious code, a lot of malicious libraries which can be downloaded by developers. For example, making an error in describing the library, the typo. Which number of companies, according to your assessment, do use this open source code in Russia? I mean, that code that was verified there. Infected one. Well, I cannot speak about the infected one because we have not seen open source based compromising. These were just statements and one of the attack vectors which really exist, but we didn't face it. But it doesn't deliver any destruction activity. Well, everything depends on the code, because usually they have stylers which steal data of the users, login, password, there's backdoor functionality, loaders functionality, and they can download additional code to the infected machine. So my question is, which number of companies in Russia, are these single companies, hundreds or thousands of companies which use open source, which has injected malicious functionality? I cannot tell you how many companies in Russia were infected in such a way. Open source uses, I don't know, almost all the companies use open source with third-party dependencies. But the fact itself that you have to take care about the safe development and that variants of infection are available. Another interesting trend is it was watering hole. This is when the infection is given to some popular resource, is getting infected, and users enter it. For example, some news resource. Users enter this news resource, and they see some advertising which redirects them to another site. For example, please put the data of your mobile car or download the malicious code. Therefore, it was infected, this site. And this year it was related to the compromising of Bittrex. Everybody knows the Bittrex. Many sites use Bittrex in Russia. There was one vulnerability discovered, and we've discovered approximately more than 14,000 sites compromised with this particular vulnerability. In the beginning, it was a simple redirection to a site with sales. Then there were crazy discounts out there. You had to press, you should put your banking data, and then it was leaked. But later they started more serious exploitation. They've started more serious hiding of the malicious code. But the main HTML of the picture and Bittrex in CGS, it's located in the PHP code. Bittrex. So during the last wave, what interesting was happening there is that an error was achieved by hackers where they found the compromise of the site. Well, the site fell down because they had a mistake in closing some PHP tags. So they've been doing denial of service. There was no profit. Nobody was able to go to their sites due to denial of service. Once again, the trend that we're noticing right now is the trend for complication of attacks. We see the improvement of phishing letter deliveries. Previously, they could use some simple topics about sales and things like that. Right now, they speak about some more important problems. Yeah, more important for people. For example, there was a news related with mobilization, lists for mobilization delay, and people follow it and they open it because this is important for them. They open, they follow it, and hacker infects their computer. And this happens more and more often. If previously it was in the hands of complicated attacks, APTs, some small target attacks, but right now they use it. They use same activists, which I've been speaking about. And I have a feeling that they improve their techniques, improve their skills, and they did have time for that. So on one side, it's interesting what really happens here for us researchers, but on the other side, it's a second wave. It's more dangerous for segment.ru because attacks are more well prepared. The data which has been leaked has been manufactured in a more complicated way, not just dig a hole and sold out. No. The Telegram channels are not available, and it leads to the reduction of the number of attacks because, like you said, in the beginning there was a big mass amount due to simple techniques. Right now techniques become more complicated, so maybe there are less of those people who can use them for attacks. Do you see any trend of achieving the success of attacks with complication of these attacks? I would say if we're speaking about mass attacks like DDoS, we are going to send some plateau. It has grown, it's there, but in principle is like a norm for us. From the point of view of regular attacks, which become more and more complicated, I would call yes, because we see that there is a certain reduction with the complexity increase. But do you see any complex attacks together with easy attacks, the growth of target attacks, growth of very complicated attacks? The growth of target attacks is happening. This is some kind of a seasonality because from year to year, for some reason, due to some reason, IPT attacks are starting in the summer. Yeah, immediately after the summer. They are called for investigation. We investigate the WPO activity of the hackers and the network infrastructure is being investigated. And from year to year, we do see that the second half of the year is more active for us. I don't know about others, but for us it is more active. We work more. And if you will look at what was in the beginning of the year and what is happening right now, I would say the complexity is growing due to growing number of the very complicated attacks. Well, it's approximately similar one, but target attacks number is growing. Can you evaluate by how much? About by 20%, about 20%, not significantly, but there is a growth by 20-30%. But if you will look at some complicated target, unusual attack, what was it? Can you tell us? Well, for example, there was an interesting case when there was a penetration through through trusted relationships when you have one big organization and it has subsidiaries. For example, one of the subsidiaries breaks into it. However, they have similar segments of the network, and for example, improper policies set up, improper access rights, and hacker, after getting a network admin account, he can get into the account of the main organization, and from this organization that can proliferate its activity to another points. And we did have one of these cases. Another interesting case was when hackers used defense measures to follow the users. For example, Denis Gaidenko was speaking about it, that they use a DLP to follow what user does. So they use defense methods to proliferate their own attacks. They use antiviral decisions so that machines would deliver those malicious codes. So the trend is available when the hackers use the security methods to proliferate this malicious code and follow the users. It's not like we need to call them off, but we should have a proper access for them, so that not everybody could go there. What do you expect in year 23, and how are you preparing for this? Well, in 23, we do expect reinforcement of the open source trend, more of malicious packages, depending from those that will be downloaded to the... Well, about supply chain factor, by the way, we have limited access to GitHub right now. Why? Still all the developers are using it. We have not prohibited the GitHub. We just cannot contribute. But we can easily know how to download the content. From public repositories, we do have access from Russia. And the trend is just in the beginning. So we've done this system of code analysis, and we're going to speak about it 20th of December. And you can inbuild the process of safe development. Yes, what do you expect next year, and what should be done in order to do this? Well, you've been speaking about open source. You can develop the process of safe development. You have to, first of all, search for vulnerabilities in the code that you are downloading. It's well known to everybody. And right now, there is another important aspect of safe development is open source for... Another important trend is to increase... is the increase of the phishing, and everything will be depend, according to my opinion, to geopolitical conditions, because all the attacks today in hacktivism are related with geopolitical situation. If there will be certain cool down, there will be reduction of these attacks, and people will not participate in this. But if there will be increase of the situation, we'll see more of those attacks. There will be phishing, target attacks, break-ins. Right now, we also see a working for Proxy Shell, and right now, in the course of next weeks, we will see that there will be break-ins to the exchanges. We don't see any exceptions of new 0 days appearances for the products which are used by the companies. Once again, there's import substitution right now. Everybody's switching to Linux, Astra Linux, and once again, there will be a growth of malicious code that will be produced for these systems, and we have to be ready for this. Hackers will have a desire to break somebody. Well, because it's going to be Linux, they will have to write a code for Linux. And we have to prepare the means of protection. And how do you evaluate Russian operating systems from the point of view of security? I cannot tell you. I did not estimate them, but I think speaking about Linux ones, there is not a lot of malicious code for Linux. Mostly it's Windows, but I think that there will be a lot of interesting news next year about finding the vulnerabilities, about finding new companies which are directed for breaking in Linux machines. That's why it will be understandable when this mass process will be launched for import substitution. And the final question that I have to you, how do you prepare yourself for the next year from point of view of internal organization, your team? How do you redistribute roles? How do you increase the size of the team? How do you introduce some new roles from the point of view of process of operation? From the point of view of extension, yes, we are growing. We are getting ready. By how much? By about 30-40% we plan to extend. From the point of view of open source, we are planning to develop our system of external dependencies analysis, which is with the Python, it was already done, and then RPM repository. Interesting to look at what happens with Docker containers, because there's another trend. Everything is being containerized. Kubernetes is introduced. Everything is brought to the cloud. This is also very interesting because there's a lot of interesting things inside of it. And actually speaking, we do a team rotation so that between the objectives, a person would do programming or maybe decipher the code, and we are trying to automate everything as much as possible so that we would have more time for the research. And automation at the account of what? So that analysis of the malicious code would and search for the connections between different groups would take minimal time, so that we could spend more time to new attacks and have more deep investigations. Okay, good. Thank you very much, Denis. It is very interesting. You have noted several interesting trends. The usage of the open source code, its complication for injection of the malicious code, it's a complication of mass attacks by the hacktivists. Then this is also import substitution related with the Linux and attacks against new operating systems, which previously were not as popular. And what else? And there was something else. Yeah, there was something else. That's it. What else? What else was there? Yeah, we are. Okay, thank you very much. Thank you very much, Denis. It's very interesting. It was Denis Kuvshinov who told us what they were able to see this year from the point of view of hacker attacks and how the preparation is happening and which trends are expected for the hacker attacks next year. Please stay with us.